The year is 1969. Neil Armstrong's boot touches lunar dust, and back on Earth, 20-year-old Margaret Sullivan clutches her transistor radio in her college dorm room, tears streaming down her face. She's witnessing humanity's greatest achievement, broadcast live into her tiny speakers. Fast forward 55 years, and Margaret's grandson Jake scrolls past the moon landing footage on TikTok without a second glance, convinced it was all filmed on a Hollywood soundstage. What happened? How did we go from a generation that watched miracles unfold in real time to one that questions whether those miracles ever happened at all? The answer lies buried in the invisible forces that shaped two of history's most dramatically different generations. Forces so powerful, they rewired the very fabric of how humans process truth itself. In 1950, the average American encountered roughly 500 advertisements per day. Today, that number has exploded to over 5,000. But this isn't just a story about marketing overload. This is about two generations whose brains were literally sculpted by entirely different information ecosystems, creating what psychologists now call parallel realities. Let me tell you about Dorothy Lang, a 78-year-old retired librarian from Ohio. Every morning at exactly 7 a.m., she turns on her local news station, the same one she's watched for 37 years. The anchor, Jim Patterson, has been delivering the news to her community since 1987. She trusts Jim because she's seen him cover her neighbor's house fire, her grandson's high school graduation, and the opening of the new grocery store downtown. When Jim tells Dorothy that a new vaccine has been approved, she believes him not because of the science, but because Jim has never lied to her before. Now meet Zara Chen, a 19-year-old college student who gets her news from 17 different TikTok creators, 43 Instagram accounts, and a constantly shifting landscape of Reddit threads. Last week, she discovered that one of her most trusted sources was actually a sophisticated bot network run from a server farm in Macedonia. The week before that, she learned that a viral video she'd shared had been debunked by 3 fact-checking organizations, but only after it had already been viewed 12 million times. Who would you trust more, the familiar face who's been wrong twice in 37 years, or the crowdsourced intelligence that's right 73% of the time, but wrong in spectacular, viral fashion the other 27%? This is the fundamental divide that's tearing apart families, friendships, and entire societies. Baby boomers, born between 1946 and 1964, came of age during what historians call the golden age of gatekeeping. Gen Z, born after 1997, grew up in the age of infinite information. And these two ages operate by completely different rules. Here's something that will blow your mind. The human brain doesn't fully develop its ability to process complex, contradictory information until age 25. Baby boomers were learning to navigate information when there were exactly 3 television networks, 1 or 2 local newspapers, and Walter Cronkite ending each broadcast with, "and that's the way it is." Their neural pathways literally hardened around the concept of authoritative singular truth. Generation Z, meanwhile, has been bombarded with infinite streams of contradictory information since they could hold a smartphone. Their brains adapted to this chaos by developing what researchers call epistemic flexibility, the ability to hold multiple conflicting truths simultaneously and navigate between them fluidly. Sounds impressive, right? But here's the catch. This same flexibility makes them profoundly skeptical of any single authoritative source. Let me paint you a picture of 1962. President Kennedy appears on television to address the Cuban Missile Crisis. Across America, families gather around their single television set, that massive piece of furniture that dominated the living room. There are no other channels to flip to, no websites to fact-check his claims in real time, no comment sections full of alternative theories. When the President of the United States speaks, 65 million Americans hear the exact same words at exactly the same time. They may disagree with his politics, but they agree on what he actually said. Contrast this with January 6, 2021. As events unfold at the Capitol, Americans are watching through dozens of different lenses simultaneously. Fox News viewers see one reality, CNN viewers see another, TikTok users see yet another, while people scrolling through Facebook encounter a kaleidoscope of perspectives filtered through algorithmic bubbles tailored specifically to their psychological profiles. By evening, it's as if the same event occurred in parallel universes. But here's where the story takes an unexpected turn. Both generations are responding rationally to their information environments. Baby boomers learned to trust institutional authority because for most of their formative years, those institutions were relatively trustworthy and transparent. The media exposed Watergate not because they were trying to destroy trust in government, but because they believed in holding power accountable within the system. Generation Z learned to distrust institutional authority because they watched those same institutions fail spectacularly. They saw weapons of mass destruction that didn't exist justify a 20-year war. They watched financial institutions that were too big to fail gamble away the global economy in 2008, then get bailed out while their families lost their homes. They witnessed social media platforms promise to connect the world, then deliberately amplify division because it drove engagement. Quick question before we dive deeper. Where are you watching this from, and what time is it where you are? Are you Team Dorothy, trusting the familiar voices, or Team Zara, questioning everything? Drop a comment and let me know. I read every single one. The pharmaceutical industry offers the perfect case study for this generational divide. In 1955, when Jonas Salk's polio vaccine was announced, Americans literally danced in the streets. Church bells rang across the country. Parents wept with relief. The vaccine had been tested, approved, and endorsed by every major medical institution, and that was enough. Fast forward to 2021, and a similar medical breakthrough, mRNA vaccines developed in record time to combat COVID-19, are met with fierce skepticism by millions of Americans. But here's what most people miss. Both responses make perfect sense within their historical contexts. Baby boomers remember when doctors were demigods in white coats who made house calls and knew your family for decades. They remember when the FDA approval process was so rigorous that it took years, sometimes decades, for new drugs to reach the market. When these institutions said something was safe, it usually was, because the incentive structures prioritized caution over speed. Generation Z, however, has watched pharmaceutical companies pay billions in settlements for knowingly addictive opioids, seen advertisements for drugs that were later recalled for deadly side effects, and grown up understanding that regulatory agencies often have revolving doors with the industries they're supposed to regulate. When these same institutions now say, "Trust us," Gen Z's skepticism isn't paranoia, it's pattern recognition. But here's where both generations might be missing something crucial. Baby boomers' trust in institutions served them well for decades, but many institutions have fundamentally changed since their youth. The incentive structures that once rewarded long-term thinking and community trust have been replaced by quarterly profit reports and algorithmic engagement metrics. Meanwhile, Generation Z's skepticism protects them from obvious manipulation, but it also makes them vulnerable to what researchers call epistemic nihilism, the belief that truth itself is unknowable, so you might as well choose whatever reality feels most comfortable. Let me tell you about the most dangerous consequence of this divide. It's not that one generation is right and the other is wrong. It's that they're operating in completely different realities, using completely different methods to evaluate truth, and those methods are increasingly incompatible. Take climate change. Baby boomers who accept climate science do so largely because respected institutions like NASA and the IPCC have reached consensus. Those who reject it do so because other trusted authorities, perhaps their longtime pastor or a news anchor they've watched for years, have told them it's uncertain. Generation Z approaches the same question completely differently. They don't care what NASA says, they look at the data directly. They compare temperature records, examine satellite imagery, and cross-reference findings from multiple sources. Those who accept climate science do so because the evidence is overwhelming across hundreds of independent sources. Those who reject it often fall down rabbit holes of contradictory information that's impossible to navigate without scientific expertise they don't possess. Both approaches have merit, and both have fatal flaws. Here's a statistic that should terrify you. According to a 2023 study by the Reuters Institute, the average American now spends less than 30 seconds evaluating the credibility of a news source before sharing it. But here's the even more terrifying part. That number is identical across all generations. Baby boomers aren't actually better at evaluating sources. They just encounter fewer of them. The real crisis isn't generational, it's structural. We've built information systems that reward speed over accuracy, engagement over truth, and confirmation over challenge. Both baby boomers and Generation Z are doing their best to navigate systems that were never designed for human cognition. Consider this: the human brain evolved to process information from about 150 people, the size of a typical hunter-gatherer tribe. We could know everyone personally, understand their motivations, and evaluate their credibility based on direct experience. Now we're expected to process information from millions of sources, most of them strangers with unknown motivations, using cognitive tools that were never designed for this task. Baby boomers solve this problem by falling back on familiar authorities, the institutions and individuals they learned to trust in simpler times. Generation Z solves it by crowdsourcing credibility, assuming that the collective wisdom of many sources will eventually converge on truth. Both strategies work sometimes, and both fail catastrophically at others. The conspiracy theory ecosystem offers perhaps the clearest window into this dynamic. Baby boomers who fall into conspiracy thinking typically do so through trusted sources. A longtime friend shares a Facebook post, a respected community leader endorses a theory, or a familiar media personality promotes an idea. They follow linear paths: trusted source, new information, adjusted worldview. Generation Z conspiracy theorists follow completely different patterns. They typically start with a question or suspicion, then research extensively across multiple platforms. They find communities of like-minded researchers, contribute original analysis, and develop elaborate theories through collaborative effort. Their conspiracies tend to be more complex, more evidence-based, and more resistant to debunking because they've been constructed through active participation rather than passive consumption. Paradoxically, this makes Generation Z conspiracy theories both more sophisticated and more dangerous than their boomer counterparts. But here's the plot twist: both generations are exhibiting the same underlying human behavior. The need to make sense of an increasingly complex and unpredictable world. The difference is the tools they're using and the information environments they're navigating. Let me share a story that perfectly illustrates this. In 2020, a 67-year-old retired teacher named Robert Martinez started questioning the safety of 5G cell towers after his longtime doctor mentioned concerns during a routine visit. Robert trusted his doctor, had known him for 15 years, and had never been given bad medical advice. So when Dr. Peterson said he was concerned about the rush to deploy 5G technology, Robert began paying attention. Meanwhile, 20-year-old college student Emma Rodriguez started questioning 5G technology after noticing that several independent YouTubers she followed were all raising similar concerns around the same time. She spent weeks researching scientific papers, comparing electromagnetic frequency data, and participating in online forums dedicated to analyzing the technology. Her investigation was more thorough, but her conclusions were remarkably similar to Robert's. Both Robert and Emma arrived at the same place through completely different routes. Both used methods that made sense within their information ecosystems. Both were responding to legitimate concerns about the pace of technological change and the potential for corporate interests to override public health considerations. The tragedy is that Robert and Emma would likely dismiss each other's concerns entirely if they met. Robert would see Emma as a naive young person who's been brainwashed by internet misinformation. Emma would see Robert as an old man who blindly trusts authority figures without doing his own research. They're both right and they're both wrong. This brings us to perhaps the most important insight of our entire investigation. The generational divide over belief and skepticism isn't really about age, it's about information systems. And those systems are failing both generations in different but equally serious ways. Baby boomers are vulnerable to what researchers call trusted source manipulation, when bad actors gain credibility by mimicking the institutions and individuals that boomers have learned to trust. This is why Russian disinformation campaigns were so effective on Facebook. They didn't try to convince boomers directly. They created fake news sites that looked and sounded like legitimate local newspapers, then shared them through networks of seemingly authentic community voices. Generation Z is vulnerable to what's known as distributed deception, sophisticated disinformation campaigns that exploit their preference for multiple sources and collaborative research. Bad actors create networks of fake experts, bogus research papers, and coordinated social media campaigns that appear to be organic grassroots movements but are actually centrally orchestrated. Neither generation is equipped to defend against the type of manipulation targeting the other. But here's the fascinating part. When researchers put baby boomers and Generation Z together in controlled environments and give them structured ways to share their different approaches to information evaluation, something remarkable happens. They become significantly better at identifying both trusted source manipulation and distributed deception. Boomers' institutional knowledge helps Gen Z understand which sources have historical credibility and why. Gen Z's research skills help boomers navigate the modern information landscape and spot sophisticated manipulation techniques. The solution isn't for one generation to adopt the other's approach. It's for both to understand that they're facing the same challenges with different tools, and those tools are most effective when used together. This is Professor Archive, and if you're finding value in this deep dive into the invisible forces shaping our reality, I'd be incredibly grateful if you could support the channel with a super thanks. It helps me spend more time researching these complex topics and bringing you the kind of in-depth analysis you won't find anywhere else. Let's talk about what this means for the future. We're facing a crisis that goes far beyond generational conflict. We're seeing the breakdown of shared reality itself. When different groups of people can look at the same events and see completely different things, democratic society becomes impossible. But there's reason for hope, and it comes from an unexpected source. The youngest members of Generation Z are already developing new strategies for navigating information chaos. Born into a world where deepfakes, AI-generated content, and sophisticated manipulation are the norm, they're developing what researchers call native digital literacy, instinctive skills for detecting deception that older internet users had to learn consciously. Meanwhile, many baby boomers are adapting too. They're learning to question sources they once trusted blindly, while still maintaining their valuable ability to distinguish between institutions with long track records and newcomers with hidden agendas. The future belongs to neither pure trust nor pure skepticism, but to what philosophers call calibrated credence. The ability to assign appropriate levels of confidence to different types of claims based on the quality and quantity of evidence available. This requires combining the best aspects of both generational approaches, the boomers' institutional knowledge and long-term perspective, with Generation Z's research skills and healthy skepticism of authority. But here's the challenge. Our current information systems actively work against this kind of nuanced thinking. Social media algorithms reward extreme positions because they drive engagement. News organizations sensationalize stories because they need clicks to survive. Politicians exploit division because it motivates their base. We've created systems that profit from confusion and conflict, then we wonder why people are confused and conflicted. The path forward requires more than individual effort. It requires systemic change. We need new institutions designed for the digital age, new forms of accountability for information platforms, and new educational approaches that teach people to navigate complexity rather than seeking simple answers. But most importantly, we need to recognize that both baby boomers and Generation Z are responding rationally to their information environments. Neither generation is inherently more gullible or more wise. They're both doing their best with the tools they've been given. The real question isn't why boomers still believe while Gen Z doesn't. The real question is, how do we build information systems that serve human flourishing rather than exploiting human psychology? The answer will determine whether our society fragments into incompatible realities or evolves into something more robust, more truthful, and more humane than what came before. Margaret Sullivan, the woman we met at the beginning who cried when humans first walked on the moon, recently had a conversation with her grandson Jake about that day. Instead of dismissing his skepticism, she showed him the original broadcast, explaining what it felt like to live in a world where such achievements seemed impossible until they happened. Jake, in return, showed her how to verify historical footage using digital analysis tools, cross-reference multiple sources, and spot the telltale signs of the conspiracy theories that have clouded his generation's view of that historic moment. Together, they watched the moon landing again, Margaret with her trust in human achievement, Jake with his healthy skepticism but newly informed perspective. For 20 minutes, they shared the same reality. It was a small miracle, but perhaps it's these small miracles that will save us from the larger crisis of truth itself. The future depends not on choosing between trust and skepticism, but on learning when to apply each, and how to bridge the gap between the generations who mastered different forms of wisdom in different eras. The question isn't who's right, it's whether we can learn to be right together. That's all for today's deep dive. What profession are you in, and how has the information revolution affected your field? I'm genuinely curious about your perspective. The comments section is where the real conversation happens. If this analysis opened your eyes to something new, don't forget to like and subscribe. Professor Archive will be back next week with another investigation into the hidden forces shaping our world. Until then, keep questioning, keep learning, and keep building bridges across the divides that separate us.